Yeah, so there's something I've been noticing a lot recently, and it's that there's been a pretty significant backlash, I feel like, against course evaluations for university courses. Largely coming from instructors and professors. Um, a lot of it's kind of coming from a direction saying this isn't really a fair way of evaluating, how well instructors and professors are doing at teaching. That these shouldn't play a role in like promotion and tenure type decisions. That they're useless. That they don't help. That they contribute to grade inflation, all that kind of stuff. And I don't necessarily want to try to weigh in on this idea of like what administrators, what colleges should do, and how committees should use them, for things like promotion and tenure decisions, because I don't really know enough about that. I don't really know enough about what role they currently play in those types of decisions, and so I'm not really in a good position to be able to say like, do they play too much of a role? Are they too significant a factor, or not significant enough, or anything like that? I want to talk kind of like more generally, like why I think they're important and why we should, generally speaking, care about them, why they're an important institution. Um, yeah, so that's kind of my aim here, to say like a little bit about like, why these are valuable in general, and then a little bit about how I use them in particular, because, it's obviously going to vary a little bit depending like what kind of course you teach. Um, but for me, most of the courses I've taught have been first year composition courses, and so I'm looking at it primarily from like how I use them for that. But I think the first thing we have to keep in mind when we talk about this is that college students are adults. And that should be too obvious to be worth saying, but I feel the need to say it only because I think when people talk about this, sometimes they talk as though college students aren't adults. And I think that can sometimes be part of the problem. If you're, again, if you talk about, the people taking your class as if they're, little kids or animals, when you're around your friends or around other instructors, that probably carries over into how you talk to them. And that's, probably not a good thing. But yeah, look, it's like these are adults, and they're people that know what their goals are, in terms of occupational, like educational goals, or if they don't know like what they want to do with their life, then they know that they don't want to know what they want to do with their life. They made a decision to be here. They made a decision to take the courses that they're taking, unless one is required. And their perspective matters. They are in some position to make that assessment of whether a course was good, whether or not it was actually a good use of their time. Now, in some respects, they'll be in a better position to make that assessment, a few years down the road when they're like working or when they're in graduate school, and they can look back and say, okay, was this course actually, a good way to get introduced to these concepts? Was this helpful now, in hindsight? But a lot of the things you put on a course evaluation aren't necessarily those kind of things, right? You don't need a couple years, of hindsight to know whether, the instructor was organized. You don't need, to wait a couple years to ask a student whether the grading process in that class was fair, whether the instructor was professional, or even just, did you like the instructor? Was the course a good experience? And these are all things that that matter ultimately, I think. um Now, obviously, some 18 and 19-year-olds are legitimately difficult people to work with. just like some 36-year-olds and some 46-year-olds and 50-year-olds are legitimately difficult people to work with. And sometimes, sometimes adults don't get along with other adults. That is a thing that happens. But I think, to believe what some people seem to believe about course evaluations, you would have to think that most of these people are, incorrigible. Right? I think there's something in the fear that, this is going to be a major force in, grade inflation. Because, people are only going to, give you a good, evaluation if you give them a good grade. And that seems wrong. Again, some college students are petty because, some people are petty, but I think most people aren't. I think most people understand the concept that, if the grading process is fair and transparent and not unrealistically harsh, and, you do your best and you get the grade you get, and maybe you could have done better, but, it's not the instructor's fault. Unless it actually is, which, that happens sometimes. I'm still kind of pissed at some things, if professors, instructors did back in the day when I was an undergrad. If a student's mad at their professor, their instructor, it's that doesn't always reflect badly on the student. Sometimes it actually is sometimes they have a point. But yeah, most, putting even just the grading aside, it's like most people aren't jerks. Most college students aren't jerks. Like if you might have a semester where there's some of them that, you have to feel in the class that just kind of don't like you from the get-go. That's a thing that can happen. But across, semesters over the course of years, I think if you teach, courses in college and consistently, you're disliked. Consistently, students don't feel respected by you. They don't like your class. They don't like the atmosphere. They don't like the way you relate to them. That, I think, is probably indicative of something. I don't think that's, a whole lot of them are just jerks. That might be the thing where it's like, okay, if everywhere you go it smells like poop, maybe you're the one that, pooped your pants, right? So that's just some general thoughts on why I think course evaluations are important and why I think, we should care what they say. But the way that I try to do it, why I find them personally helpful, the way I go about this is I always say on the last day of class, I tell them, between semesters, when I'm revising this course, I'm going to have a stack of these next to me, and I'm going to read them all twice before I do anything else in the way of revising the course. So anything that's helpful, anything you have that's helpful for me in that process is really greatly appreciated. I wouldn't, want to do this if I didn't think people enjoyed it. So hopefully, how can I make this a better, experience for people? And, when I'm actually in the process of reading through them, a lot of what they write is helpful. And some of what they write, sometimes it's stuff that sometimes people have opinions or comments about the course that I don't actually agree with, but it's still helpful. It's still helpful to know that that's where they're coming from, that's kind of where some people who take the class or might take the class are coming from. And obviously, a pattern is more significant than an instance. If a lot of people have similar feelings about something over, in a course or over a couple of semesters, that's probably more, I read more into that than if it's one isolated comment, although I try to take every comment seriously. There's limits to how much you can change, obviously. Sometimes there's very specific reasons why you need to be able to do things a certain way, but sometimes the real takeaway is that, I need to do a better job articulating why we do a thing the way that we do it, rather than changing it. So if like people, still don't love something we're doing, they at least can see why it's like, I find it necessary to do it that way, and they can at least kind of see where I'm coming from. So that's why I like them. That's why I find them helpful. That's why I think, we should care about them. And yeah, hopefully that's sort of a helpful rundown of all of that.